Spoilers for the Human Centipede. There's this song that was doing the rounds last year, Red Flags by Tom Cardy, about a bloke on a date with a woman who initially seems fine. Only when he asks her favourite movie, she exclaims a masterpiece of art called Human Centipede. Obviously to a tune, but I'm not doing that. That song is catchy and sometimes I find myself singing it. And I'm sitting there listening to this redhead describe it as the best movie of all, a tour de force, a narrative of character growth, and I was like, damn, yeah, this genuinely would be someone's favourite movie. Someone out there gets home after a long day of work and puts the Human Centipede on to unwind, and like, not as a joke. And so I thought, hey, was it good? Was it schlocky, stupid bollocks, torture porn, silly fun, or something deeper, more profound? Was it extremity in its purest form, or just the worst thing ever to put to film? Let's have a look today. When I covered Gaspar Noé's French extremity movie Climax, I got a lot of comments talking about how much I misused the term French extremity cinema, since I cited works like Salo and the Serbian film as members of that ilk, being Italian and Serbian respectively, obviously, and Salo itself preceding the invention of the genre. And that's on me. Not because I believe I used that term wrong, but rather because I clearly did not take enough time to explain why I used that descriptor so sweepingly across those films. For me, a new French extremity movie does not need to be French, nor does it need to be new. Rather, I'm going to pitch to you that new French extremity, as a term, encompasses any film that features extreme horror of any variety, but most importantly, features clear messaging on anything from national and personal politics to women, feminism, sexual assault, and the body, and places a heavy emphasis on voyeurism. New French extremity is almost a spectator sport, a personal challenge to see if you can make it through the gauntlet of visuals and themes and horrific on-screen acts presented to you. And yet it's so much more than torture porn. It's a way a filmmaker can wrench a drastic, cynical, and often frustrated scream into the abyss of their audience, hoping whatever they see imprints on them so miserably that the message is somehow picked up by collateral. It's a genre of reaction, a genre of disgust, subversion, and exploitation. It doesn't always hit the mark, but it will often at least leave an impression, which is half the battle. Yes, while New French Extremity was first named in 2004 by Canadian film historian and festival programmer James Quant following his observations on the way French filmmaking had taken dark and grotesque turns since the 1990s, things don't pop into existence the moment they are named. Did Pluto suddenly exist on the 18th of February 1930? No, it was always there, wheeling around in the dark. The message is what separates your average torture porn flick from New French Extremity. It's what separates the Terrifier series from the works of Gaspar Noé, and to be blunt, I much prefer the Terrifier series. If you've seen my video on Terrifier, you'll know I think it's great. I really enjoyed my time with those movies compared to the more miserable why are we even here slog I occasionally find Noé's work to be. This is not a shit on silly schlock horror video. I think everything has its place. And while you could argue that Art the Clown is named as such because art is violent, art is offensive, art is poisoning our nuclear family with its depravity, that's basically where the analysis ends. Compare that to Salo, a damning indictment of Italy's fascist regime, and you'll see it's apples and oranges. While both employ grotesque horror as the means to tell a story, both are wildly different in vibe alone. And so, where do we place the Human Centipede? The Human Centipede tells the story of an insane retired German surgeon with far too much time on his hands who kidnaps and sews together 3 victims, mouth to anus, to keep as a pet, and the hilariously sitcom shenanigans that ensue as his new pet adjusts to its new life. While I can appreciate and respect an interest in science, anyone taking an interest in STEM should understand that there's far more in life to explore than the limits of the human body. Why conduct grisly and inhumane human experimentation when you can use Brilliant? If only our resident Dr. Josef Heiter had access to Brilliant, where he could have discovered an abundance of courses focused on maths, programming, data, and AI. No need to sit there twiddling other people's thumbs in retirement, Doctor, when you could be keeping yourself engaged and challenged on the daily with hands-on learning and an enormous catalogue of interactive lessons that are updated with new content every single month. You will never run out of ways to learn new and interesting things with Brilliant. What's that? Conduct obscure experiments on people to recreate conjoined twins against the laws of nature? No thanks. too messy. I'd much rather get cracking on this cool level 3 maths course where I can learn all about geometry. Wowee, that's far more interesting. I am so glad I never sunk to the levels of depravity Dr. Heiter sunk to. I feel far more productive, and I can actually use this to further my career. Replace your doom scrolling and get something of genuine value out of your phone time. Try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/merkkk. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring today's video. It's hard to believe that the Human Centipede only grossed roughly $252,000, considering it's one of the most famous horror movies of all time. It's arguably sci-fi, arguably body horror, arguably torture porn, and yet transcends all of the above. Parodied to the ends of the earth by the likes of South Park, the Human Centipede marked some kind of cultural turning point. No one paid to see it, and yet it had a profound and nebulous impact. So what's it about? And what is it trying to tell us? The Human Centipede arguably, and I do mean arguably, encompasses many themes. Still, we see everything from long-tired horror cliches like two hot girls' car breaks down in the forest, to obscure Nazi science, to the power of enduring, indomitable human will, to almost Frankenstein observations on monster versus human, pet versus victim, and how one's identity is as much a personal experience as it is a label attributed by everyone around you. If a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? And if you're captive in the house of a man who perceives you completely as an animal, are you one? Even more abstractly, is it, as this r/film user suggested, a socio-political film about how we are chained to our roles in society until we inevitably die? Does the film explore themes surrounding how the powerful will always be powerful and social mobility is simply a pipe dream? A lot of interviews with director Tom Six, despite being cited in related articles, just don't exist anymore, which is frustrating considering what a character he appears to be. In his own observations of the movie and its director, Roger Ebert commented, "I learned his favourite actor is Klaus Kinski. He is an AK-47 enthusiast and wears RAF sunglasses and Panama hats. Not the kind of guy you want to share your seat on a Ferris wheel with." He has said, "I get a rash from too much political correctness. I promise you that after this movie, his skin was as smooth as a Gerber baby." Still, scraps of his perspective can be found here and there in various interviews and articles and summaries. He was inspired by filmmakers like Takashi Miike, who apparently taught him the value of long takes, rather than frantic cuts to inflate the momentum of a scene at the expense of tension. The Human Centipede began as a thought experiment on the depths of human punishment. Seeing a sex offender get off on a light sentencing, Six recalled, "From out of nowhere, I made a sick joke. I said, they should stitch his mouth to the asshole of a very fat truck driver as a punishment. After that, the idea kept coming into my head." I like this statement for two reasons, none of which I imagine were intended by Six. Firstly, because surely this would be almost as much a punishment for the quote fat truck driver as it would be the sex offender. Secondly, what did a fat truck driver ever do to you, man? It's a noble profession. And thirdly, because I feel like it demonstrates more Six's gleeful interest in ostensibly torture, given the right human specimen. These are ideas he explores in the second and third installment of the series, the third installment especially, but we won't cover those, at least not today. Six is also inspired by the realities of human fear. According to that aforementioned interview with The Guardian, Six believes people are more frightened of interference with their bodies than of torture or death, suggesting that the violation of an operation like this supersedes any suffering brought about by torture. Still, personally, I don't feel like there's a difference. Sewing people together and forcing them to poop in each other's mouths while you feed them dog food and whip them horribly for disobeying until you break them mentally is torture. Unless I'm missing something massive, this point holds less weight. Tom Six also made this movie to showcase a science fiction premise he was intrigued by. He specifically sought a surgeon to consult with when ironing out the wrinkles in his premise, and was assured that people conjoined in the way he had in mind could live for years. Obviously, they would be short of fluids, since their urinary tracts would remain separate. Also, most of the nutrients from the front victim's feces would have been removed by his digestive system. These problems could be solved by providing each of the Centipede's members with a backup drip feed while they were asleep, and the film shows just such a system in operation. The man clearly thought up something awful and worked through the concept in the form of a movie, which is exactly what art is for. In another separate interview with The Guardian titled "How We Made the Human Centipede," Six goes into detail in describing the process, the conception of the Human Centipede. "I asked my ex-girlfriend to get on all fours, and I took a picture of her in that position, which I photoshopped into the first Human Centipede prototype. The image had all the ingredients for an iconic horror movie. claustrophobia, the inability to speak, eating someone else's poop, and involuntary surgery. There's glimmers of national politics in there too, tucked away in the inspirations. Tom Six attributes some of his inspiration to Pasolini's Salo, which also involves coprophagy, let's call it. Six claimed that film was a big influence. I saw it when I was a young boy, and I can still up to this day remember almost all of its scenes. Poop isn't the only commonality those films share, as Salo is notably one of the most grotesque and explicit critiques of fascist ideology in cinema history. If this ever clicked with Six, he never mentions it, yet Six stated in an interview available only in the DVD extras that The Human Centipede is a movie that reflects on fascism. This is echoed by his lead, and according to an interview between Dieter Lasser and Clark Collis of Entertainment Weekly, The Human Centipede is a grotesque parody about the Nazi psyche. So, let's look at The Human Centipede. For those of you who haven't seen it, and don't wish to, let's recount the general plot alongside highlighting the overarching themes, analysing them, assessing their success, and concluding once and for all, is The Human Centipede good? Both as a piece of entertainment and as something of actual substance. The movie opens on a shot of a highway in Germany. Our infamous German doctor, Dr. Josef Heiter, played by Dieter Lasser, sits in his car. He's crying over a photograph of some Rottweiler's fused ass to mouth as a truck pulls up behind him. The truck driver, a fat truck driver no less, clearly inspired by Six's initial joke, climbs out of his truck and goes for a dump by the road. There's something impure about the way that this truck driver is portrayed, be it the way he awkwardly jogs into the underbrush, wrapping bog roll around his fingers, or the way he squats, barely concealed, in the roadside shrubbery to poop. Unlike the way Hater is presented, angular, eyes concealed by aviator sunglasses, steely-eyed and precise, the trucker is clumsy, undignified, messy, and too absorbed in his ablutions to understand that he is being stalked. The relationship here is distinctly prey and predator. Hater stalks through the grass like a panther, barely concealing a gun under his trench coat, a stereotypical fit for the standard shady guy. The Human Centipede conflates human and beast repeatedly throughout its runtime. It's one of the most prominent themes of the film, and we'll point it out as we go. As the glare of the sun obscures our vision of the Doctor, the scene cuts away, and he shoots. After that grim opening, we meet our two female leads, Lindsay and Jenny, played by Ashley C. Williams and Ashlyn Yenny. These two women were selected during auditions held in New York. Tom Six recalled that there were lots of actors there, but around 70% of them left the second they heard the premise. I think that's valid. I don't know if I would call this kind of breakout role career suicide as such, but it feels like a rocky one to recover from. Six selected his actors based on their ability to act with their eyes and radiate fear. When you consider that these two girls are going to speak their last, probably 45 minutes into this movie, I can see why it would be important to prioritize actors that don't need to speak to effectively emote. And honestly, it's for the best. Like, look, I can't act in the same way that I'm not a professional chef, but I don't need to be a chef to know if you've sewn my lips to the back of a stranger and made me eat their poo, and I don't think I need to be an actor to be able to say that these two are not very good. Their first scene is their most natural, but unfortunately the delivery is about to take an enormous dip. If not for the opening scene of the movie, The Human Centipede would initially appear to be taking a leaf out of Hostel's book, a movie released around 4 years prior to this one, where American tourists wind up kidnapped by a pay-to-torture facility for the ultra-rich. Jenny is on the phone here asking directions to a nightclub called The Bunker, having been invited to a party by a cute German waiter. Lindsay, bizarrely, answers her personal phone too, the calls now overlapping in the most overwhelming deluge of exposition ever, and explains to a friend that they are travelling around Europe by themselves. Ready to go, the two embark on their nighttime drive. I love the choice of the two American girls driving a car in Germany, which is the last place I'd ever personally expect to need to drive a car. That place has buses and trains everywhere. It's very walkable. That said, I have occasionally had American friends and family come to visit me here in the UK, and I always laugh when I see that they get upsold on absolutely enormous vehicles by whichever car rental company they buy through. Americans have big cars compared to Europe, so they don't tend to bat an eye when the rental company sells them an 8-seat minivan that then literally doesn't fit on half of our roads, and they spend the better part of their journey around the UK bouncing off every curb and not being able to find a parking space that will accommodate the utter beast they drove in on. Although I was initially like, why on earth have these girls got a car? Aren't they using like the Interrail services, the many buses and local train services, especially since Tom Six is Dutch himself? I decided to instead interpret interpret that some Cheshire cat of an Enterprise employee had insisted they needed to rent their own vehicle for their trip, and it added a backdrop of dry humour to the moment. Anyway, the women's journey apparently leads them to some kind of neighbouring city or town. It's not a local drive. Again, unusual. As they're roaming through the dark forest on a muddy road to nowhere, their tyre goes. They can't get a signal to call the recovery company. They don't know how to change a tyre. Now, that's a shame. Personally, empty road in a forest in the pitch black dead of night, thunder and lightning, surely I can't be driving forever. I feel like I would ease that sucker into a 10 miles per hour crawl and roll on for as long as the car would let me before I was riding on the rim. At best, you get an optimistic 5 miles out of that, but in Europe that could mean the difference. I guess they've not heard of that strategy though, as they pull to a stop and start arguing. Another car crawls up alongside them. There's a German man in it. I've only met a few Germans, but I feel like they would lean over and say, "Sorry, I only possess a rudimentary grasp of the English language. It appears that you have a flat tyre. Do you really not know how to change a flat tyre?" That's not good. That's not good. I will show you. And then say something bizarre like, better to fill the lawman's Christmas stocking than beg forgiveness on an empty Yule morning. And then when you offer to buy them a beer as a thank you, they'll say something like, a beer is not equivalent in value to roadside services, and then send you a Cash App request for €44.53 or something like that. Instead, this man begins harassing them in German, telling them he has horny videos of them at home, and other such chat roulette level nonsense. When the girls discern that he's not here to help them, they ignore him. He stares at them for a long time and then leaves. Having ascertained that outside of the car is probably the most dangerous place for them to be right now, the two girls get out of the car and decide to go walking to look for help. Not along the road, no, but through the woods, and naturally they walk for well over an hour in the freezing cold. Arguments begin. Very stiff, awkward, and poorly delivered arguments. Very rough to watch arguments. It's not their best work. Walking past a curiously epitaphed gravestone reading "My Sweet Three Dog," the girls bang on the door of a man who is about to make their night much worse. He's very creepy, asking them if they are alone before he'll even consider allowing them into his home, at which point he stalks them silently through the house. Once again, the relationship here is one of a predator and his prey. Inviting them into his home, Dr. Hayter asks if they're relatives, to which they respond no. He then offers the girls some water, pretending to make a call to roadside assistance. He spikes the water with a drug called Rohypnol, colloquially referred to as the date rape drug, since around 20 minutes after ingestion it will cause symptoms including drowsiness, amnesia, dizziness, and loss of motor control. While Yenny and Williams took on these roles because of the way they felt it might challenge them, but also admitted that they were just keen to break into acting by any means possible, Dieter Laser seemed honestly inspired by the story Six wanted to tell. Laser recalls that his father had fought in the war, on the German side of things, if you catch my drift, and it seems like from his interviews this role meant a lot to him in terms of working through some of the feelings of guilt by association he felt. Reports from on set told a story of Laser remaining in character throughout the entire filming process. He had a few incidents whereby he would accidentally injure members of the cast during their scenes, which raised the tension between castmates. He'd shout at other cast members or avoid them entirely, eating alone to preserve a level of separation that helped him maintain that cold and distant veneer in scenes. The choice of a German antagonist was no accident. Six claimed he was inspired by Nazi scientists. The chosen name, Dr. Josef Heiter, is a combination of Josef Mengele and, quoting Tom Six directly, several Nazi war criminals, Nazi doctors Vetter and Richter. I gave these names a cursory search and couldn't discern which ones he meant by this. I found a Gottfried Feder, not Vetter, the author of the 1933 Die Juden paper, literally translating to The Jews, and one Ronald Richter, an atomic scientist who fled to Argentina in the 1950s. Tom Six even claimed that the jacket Laser wore, bought by Laser himself, was a genuine jacket worn by real Nazi doctors. Hayter's house is full of bizarre wall art. In its most abstract form, it still depicts obvious conjoined twins, but some of the art flat out depicted photography from surgeries, standing out starkly against the otherwise minimalist set. These were apparently painted by Tom Six himself, according to his DVD interview. The twin art is also no coincidence, calling back to his Nazi multi-character inspiration, specifically Joseph Mengele, Heiter's apparent obsession with conjoined twins is taken from Joseph's own obsession with twins. Known as the Angel of Death, Joseph Mengele worked in Auschwitz as a physician who soon began conducting vile experiments on inmates who had no say in their treatment. He was obsessed with eugenics, the science of manipulating human genetics through breeding out undesirable features. He would select incoming Jewish and Roma inmates for brutal experiments, often performed without anesthesia. The parallels between Mengele and Heiter are abundant, most specifically in their banality. Mengele was a highly trained doctor and medical researcher, just as Heiter is a highly trained retired surgeon, now known for living in seclusion and writing his books and papers from a comfortable retirement. Although Mengele is sometimes portrayed as a mad scientist, the reality of his horror was far more mundane. Similar to Mengele, who would personally select victims to be murdered in the gas chambers at Auschwitz, Heiter has no moral quandary whatsoever with selecting his victims himself, stalking and shooting them as one might hunt and kill a rabbit for dinner. Not me, obviously, I've never done that, but one might. Consent had always proven a barrier to experimentation on twins for Mengele, especially in such a daunting field as human genetic research. But working at a concentration camp, consent was of no issue to Mengele. The same goes for Heiter, as we will see shortly. Heiter's mannerisms clearly have the girls on edge. He tells them that the roadside assistants will be there within 30 minutes, then lies on the sofa and eerily grips the blanket in anticipation, staring into the middle distance as the girls make awkward small talk. When they ask about his wife, more out of optimism than genuine curiosity, he responds, "I don't have a wife. I don't like human beings." When one of the girls knocks her water over, he screams at her in German, calling her a stupid cow, again comparing her to an animal, a lumbering, dumb animal at that. Dr. Heiter heads down to the basement to fetch a towel, and we catch a glimpse of his surgery, complete with disoriented trucker from earlier. Here, Heiter fetches a syringe he'll use to properly knock the girls out, Rohypnol more just serving to immobilize them, and returns. He tells the girls he has given them the, quote, rape drug, and despite resistance, sedates both women. As the shot focuses on Heiter's face, we see an expression of orgasmic relief and elation. The action of plunging the needle into Jenny is equivalent to him to a moment of sexual penetration. Not only does this cast the use of the phrase the rape drug in a new and miserable light, but also offers up an allegorical violation. Heiter isn't a sexual being, he never performs sexual acts, this is no sexploitation flick. For him, the act of domination is the closest he achieves to an act of sex. As is probably the most common metaphor ever in film, Heiter's physical domination of these women is a metaphor for sexual domination. Next morning we see him eating an absurdly large bowl of fruit as he disposes of the girls' possessions and rips their various papers to shreds. He is alerted to the group downstairs by the sound of them screaming and struggling. The trucker and Lindsay are already awake, followed by Jenny, who absolutely wigs out. The lighting used in the operating room here is so blue it looks like a scene from a Saw movie. Well, a scene from a Saw movie when the green overlay needed a rest. While green overlays function as a shorthand for an uncomfortable, dirty and alien vibe in any setting, blue overlays contribute to an atmosphere of stark, clinical coldness. Colour overlays aren't relied upon too heavily in Human Centipede. It's notable that they're only seen to any proper extent in the operating room. As the three victims awaken, Heiter notifies the trucker that he's not a match for the two girls and kills him via lethal injection. While this moment isn't necessarily sexual for the doctor, it's as bizarre as a murder by injection scene can get. Heiter maintains unblinking, dead eye contact with the trucker, and when the trucker can no longer meet his gaze, Heiter falls over him, laying the blanket over his face. He checks his watch, checking for time of death, a habit clearly built up over the decades of working in medicine, and then lays the blanket and himself over the trucker. The action feels like something between grief, frustration, and reverence. It's like he's praying over the body. That said, nothing about this man indicates he will be praying for the trucker, rather praying for a quick replacement. As we will see, Heiter cares absolutely nothing for his new pet until the moment it is assembled. They're merely constituent parts of one whole, a leg here, a torso there, an arm, all of which are stared at dispassionately until the puzzle is done. It's unspecified how, but Heiter soon finds his third candidate. God, these three people are the most unlucky people on the planet. 3 people in the world used by this man to make a human centipede. And if it was you, wouldn't you be absolutely raging? I would. Anyway, Heiter finds finds a Japanese man for whom we get no background or introduction. We catch glimpses of who he is when he screams at the doctor in his native language, thankfully subtitled. While bound, he announces things like, "The Japanese possess strength," but I don't think we ever learn his name. In fact, there's not a lot of characterization in this film. We are coerced into caring about the characters because we are forced to watch the atrocities as they happen to them. But you could humanize Joseph Stalin given enough hours of watching him get mutilated and shit into. You know, that's no feat. And as Hater dons his Nazi coat, we realise we're about to. This is where the meat of the film really begins. Demonstrating a big diagram of what he dubs the Siamese triplets, Hater begins explaining how the procedure will go to two terrified women and a man who does not understand English but clearly gets the gist. Hater explains that, while he is retired now, he was, and technically still is, world-renowned for his work separating conjoined twins. After spending decades separating, he wants to create. The use of the word create is really interesting here because it implies that he has spent decades dismantling complete works into incomplete pieces. Despite them screaming and begging, he sees through them so absently. It will only be when the centipede is created that Hater will ever see it as a living, breathing thing. When you consider his Nazi apparel also renders him strikingly adjacent to Victor Frankenstein's appearance, we see another parallel here, and the guys from Cortex Castle in Crash 1. Hater is assembling what he sees as body parts to breathe life into an actual creature. He glances over individual humans, the same way you'd skip past a Lego arm or Lego legs whilst constructing your figure, or Mr. Frankenstein would look past a rotting arm or leg. The theme again is also impurity, creating the perfect being from imperfect parts, turning impure, inferior individuals into something better than themselves, something they can't understand. The process would be long and involved. Hater would cut the kneecap ligaments to eliminate knee extension and keep them on all fours, remove most of the second and third components' teeth, cut open the lips and anus of each part, sew them all together, connected via their gastric systems, and with that he would have produced the Human Centipede. Now, this movie wouldn't be what it is without some tension, some flimsy hope of an impossible escape. We need to root for this operation to fail, even though this operation is exactly what we came to see. It's at this point that Lindsay realises she could have escaped at any point as she begins gnawing at her restraints. This takes like 20 seconds to get them off and was extremely frustrating to watch. By the time she's free, Hater has placed the other two victims under anaesthesia and they're passed out cold. What ensues is a chase through the house. As described by Roger Ebert, the director makes effective use of the antiseptic interior of Hater's labyrinthine home. Doors and corridors lead nowhere and anywhere, making for a chase scene that feels as confusing for us as it likely does for Lindsay, who is bleeding out badly from an injury she obtained whilst ripping the IV drip out of her arm. We see the return of the predator-prey relationship, especially when she jumps into the pool to avoid him and he stands over her with his dart gun, waiting for the moment to strike and shoot her. One of my dogs also tried to escape, the doctor explains, likening Lindsay to a scared but ultimately obedient animal. But I called him back and eventually he had to come. I put him in the middle as punishment, twice the pain, and now I know who gets to be in the middle. In Six's interview with The Guardian newspaper, it was observed, some may nonetheless feel that the film is pulling its punches. We see none of the surgery, no sense of the physical pain, just the humiliation and disgust endured by Hater's victims. Six says that was deliberate, because the basic idea is so strange, he wanted filmgoers to absorb it the first time round without too many complications. And this is true. The surgery is a little bit squeamish to watch, but it's not horrific. The focus is instead on the violation, the nature of creation, and the corruption of creation that challenges the natural order. In this scene, Hater transgresses the limits of the human body and creates something technically possible, but unbelievably cruel, and honestly would take way more maintenance than is worthwhile. Our unnamed Japanese man leads the centipede, followed by Lindsay, followed by Jenny. Ensuring the nationality of our main characters was American, Japanese, and German was apparently no accident, according to Tom Six, and was also apparently an intentional nod to World War II. I found this served as yet another flimsy metaphor, and it felt more like a coincidence that was later claimed to be a success. Japan and Germany were allied. Japan also committed crazy atrocities. America didn't join World War II until 1941, after it began in 1939. And what about all the other countries? Rather, I consider the more likely reason to be the other reason provided by Six, who also stated that he used a Japanese lead to create a language barrier between the Doctor and the centipede. Spoiler alert, but our Japanese friend here is going to be going going right at the front. I think you could also argue that he earned the top spot because his actor, Akihiro Kitamura, is a more experienced actor than the other girls, having been in and written for shows like Heroes. He really sells it as the head of the Centipede, and most of his dialogue is impressively improvised. While the girls are, as Six said, excellent at emoting with their eyes, I don't think they would have been able to lead this pede. The recovery scene features a long, slow, zooming shot of Hater watching his window, smashed by Lindsay during her escape attempt, get repaired. The airlock has been resealed. The glimmering distant hope of escape is yanked from our fingers again. Hater is beside himself with excitement after the surgery, somehow having managed to drag his new pet all the way upstairs. He checks on the healing process, happy with his clean work, and then slaps his new centipede awake. It's only now that Hater talks to his victims like a living entity. To him, they have immediately become a singular animal. To them, obviously, that transition has not occurred, and this is going to cause a lot of friction. Moved to tears by the wonder of his own creation, Hater kisses himself in the mirror he used to show the centipede its new body, and then holds it over his head. The gold oval shape must surely be intentional, considering how closely it resembles a halo. He is their god, and them his creation. No one said Hater would make sense. If you've ever seen a Saw movie in company, you'll often see your fellow viewers critiquing Jigsaw's thought process. That doesn't make sense. Why would he do that? He's not even following his own rules. A man doesn't deserve to die just for being a smoker. That was cruel, and he always claims that he never kills anyone. And I just want to take them by the shoulders and shake them until their beans fall out when I say, he's the villain, he's completely insane. Just because he himself insists that his work has a consistent logic and moral code doesn't mean he actually has one. And the same goes for Hater. To him, this has worked like a Minecraft crafting recipe. Put 3 people in the little squares on the crafting table menu, and out pops a lovely new pet, remade outside and in. He immediately settles his centipede into its new crate, and tries to train it to bring him his newspaper, demanding it march in step. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And he does not understand why his animal will not behave. And that's because, obviously, 3 holes do not make 1 bigger hole. He, in his delusion, assumes sewing people together is all it takes for them to amalgamate. Sorry pal, we're not a dog trio. Hater is deeply flawed, inconsistent, and, bluntly, stupid. It doesn't matter how respected you are in the medical field if you honestly believe this would work. This is the scene where we see his deepest desires realised, and as the audience, understand that this man is no genius. According to the Holocaust Encyclopedia, the end goal of Mengeler's experimentation was to establish a hierarchy of races, and stressed that inferior races are genetically more likely to exhibit negative traits than supposedly superior races. The hereditary traits that were considered supposedly negative included more than physical and mental illnesses and deficiencies. They also included socially unacceptable or immoral behaviours such as vagrancy, prostitution, and criminality. According to the false theory of race, intermarriage between races passed negative traits to the supposedly superior races and undermined these races. Just like the Mengele for which Hater was named, his cruel theories grew on a foundation of bullshit and prejudice, and even when given the time, space, and resources to conduct experiments and operations at his whim, he came out of it with nothing. Well, nothing but cruelty so inhumane that you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy, or fat truck driver. The Nazi influence is even emphasised here. As Mr. Frontpiece refuses to carry the newspaper in his mouth, we hear classical music played at low quality. This is deliberate, as it simulates how music would sound coming from a loudspeaker, just as music was sometimes played in concentration camps. Running Mr. Frontpiece ragged, Hater eventually pushes him into starvation extreme enough that he devours a bowl of dog food placed in front of him with his hands. He's pushed to hunger so extreme that he debases himself with dog food, full of resentment. Mr. Frontpiece buys Hater on the leg in an ill-considered act of violent protest. Bizarrely, Hater's racism overcomes his delusion in a brief moment of anger, as he zeroes in on Mr. Frontpiece specifically, calling him a kamikaze shithole. Hater looks down at his bloody raw steak and realises that he has lost his appetite. Perhaps he is realising that this will be harder than he initially assumed. The following day, Hater shows up with black boots, wielding a black riding crop. Although the boots are a new measure to prevent any more ankle biting, it has connotations that draw him visually ever closer to a Nazi scientist. After a chicken impression that would rival the Bluths,
What? That is not how chicken sounds. sounds. Chickens don't clap.
Mr. Frontpiece realizes he needs to shit, and so he does, right into the mouth of Lindsay. This scene could be fetish-adjacent scat content if Tom Six had been so inclined, but he keeps it pretty clean, all things considered. It's actually a little bit funny, solely down to Mr. Frontpiece's response. He does the full forehead to the floor bow, hands up in prayer, and he's just like, I'm so sorry, oh my god, I'm so sorry, as Lindsay screams and struggles behind him. This scene is really what solidifies the darker comedy aspects of this movie to me, as long as I don't think about it too much. As I was writing this bit, I actually retched out loud in my kitchen. I don't like poo. For the first time since, I believe, he called Jenny a stupid cow, Hater acknowledges the existence of the women as a separate entity. Screaming in her face for her to swallow it, bitch, Hater takes enormous pleasure in watching the centipede work as he hoped it would. He's changed somewhat since his raw meat realization the previous day. He's become spiteful and malicious. No longer seeing his centipede as a singular obedient animal entity ready to be domesticated and trained, he now sees this sequence as a literal trio of individuals, each one deserving of punishment for refusing to obey his commands. The women, literally without a voice, lose their identity in the centipede. They are invisible to the Doctor, merely hind legs of a perfect beast, but also lost to the audience too. Although they occasionally communicate with Mr. Frontpiece by slapping his back legs and pointing here and there, they are secondary to him and his whims, and he is secondary to the Doctor, creating an implicit hierarchy where they have no voice, no power, and no choice. The days roll on. It's maybe 3 or 4 days since Lindsay and Jenny were first captured. The centipede will not adjust to its new forever home, much to Hater's disgust. They scream the place down all night, crying loudly in the dark, until Hater threatens another operation to remove their vocal cords. A half-assed escape attempt goes as wrong as could be expected when the gang attempt to crawl out of the door during Hater's nude swim. The nude swim was an intentional touch added by Dieter, who argued, "You're always naked in front of your pairs, you don't think about it," which I thought added nicely to his character and how he sees the centipede as a literal singular animal despite its components. Anyway, they try to leave and he whips them to smithereens. Later, he takes them in for a medical checkup. Mr. Frontpiece gets the all clear on his health. Hater remarks that Lindsay is constipated, she will need laxatives. Jenny, however, is severely unwell. Her operation site is completely infected, leaking stark yellow pus down her face when he squeezes the stitches as she squirms and cries weakly. "You're dying," he tells her flatly, again presumably a practiced skill from years in the medical industry, and a moment of person-to-person interaction as his rehearsed doctor behaviour overcomes his delusion. The plan is to euthanize her and find a replacement. A knock on the door introduces 2 new characters to our cozy cast, 2 police officers. These guys initially come off cool and one step ahead, but they're just bumbling mugs who find themselves completely in over their heads far too quickly. Hater answers the door with moderate hostility, but cooperates, at least until the police demonstrate they've done enough legwork already to warrant a search of his house, which would obviously destroy him. The police explain that 2 American girls are missing. Their car was found nearby. Okay, not fantastic. You can see the cogs turning in Hater's head, but clearly they're just doing a cursory check of the nearby homes. Like, he's got alibis, the pet is downstairs in the basement, the police can't hear the screams. Alright, he invites them in so they can ask some questions. He offers them a drink. They ask for coffee, but he just brings them a glass of drugged water instead. Although Hater starts off strong with, "I have neither the time nor patience for missing persons," very rude, okay, the police have saved their trump card for this moment. Now that they are in his house, they drop the nuke. Witnesses heard a US woman screaming on your property, the officer explains, adding, "and your silver car was sighted near the lorry the missing truck driver drove." Now, this was clever. The officers fed Hater just enough information at the door to convince him that they had functionally nothing on him, earning trust enough to gain access to his home. If he kicked them out now, it would look suspicious. Also, accessing the property with the bigger picture in mind, they were more alert. They take notice of the cage, asking who it was for. Only one of them drinks the water. Going downstairs briefly, Hater excitedly tells the centipede that he will be making a quadruplet very soon, and returns to the kitchen with another injectable, the same used to knock out Jenny a few days prior. He drops it in the kitchen, and it's noticed by the officers who confiscate it, now thoroughly convinced that Hater has something to do with the disappearances. Still, the panic gets to Hater, and he approaches the situation the way we've seen him do so across the film. He dominates it by screaming his lungs out. Hater escalates and escalates and escalates, blowing up way out of proportion because, as we saw with the girls he lured in, he expects cultural conditioning to kick in. He expects the police to shrink back over offending him. He expects them to completely give in under the immense pressure he's applying to the room. Like a toddler throwing a tantrum, he assumes that if he screams loud and long enough, they will just acquiesce to his demands and go away. He also demands they finish their glasses of water first, very suspiciously, multiple times. Fantastically, they just wait him out. Like a tired parent, the officers stare bleary-eyed at this doctor and merely wait out his tantrum. When he calms down, having no more pressure to apply and no more momentum with which to do it, Hayter changes tune. He apologizes for his outburst, claiming he's overworked. The officers step over this new obstacle and ask if they can look around. The doctor refuses. They say they'll be back in a few minutes with a search warrant and leave. When Hayter heads back downstairs, wondering what on earth to do, he finds his centipede has gone missing. Just kidding. He's somehow ambushed by a 3-person sized cluster who stab him multiple times in the leg. Mr. Frontpiece bites out a huge chunk of his throat and then leaves him. Another horror cliche. Leave the big villain semi-conscious on the floor and then crawl away very slowly, looking for escape. One of those if only you just killed him moments made tenfold as he's awake again within the minute. That said, the choice to bite the throat was interesting, reflecting the animal to the doctor that he believed them to be. Mr. Frontpiece forgoes killing the doctor with the scalpel he stabbed his leg with, instead ripping a chunk of flesh out of his throat like some kind of beast. The centipede crawls up the stairs in a scene that was as agonizing to watch as it apparently was to film. Actress Ashley Williams commented that it was agony on her knees to film that scene and still maintain the illusion of being surgically connected. Mr. Frontpiece leads as best he can, screaming 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 as they climb the stairs, mirroring the way the doctor screamed 1, 2, 3, 4 at them when training them. This demonstrates the difference in how they perceive themselves. The doctor, who sees them as an animal, marches 1, 2, 3, 4 to reflect their bestial identity back to them like a 4-legged animal. Mr. Frontpiece screams 1, 2, 1, 2, reflecting their humanity. They might be walking on 4 legs, but his humanity triumphs and they leave their animal behind. In fact, the doctor seems to have inherited it, crawls up behind them, licking the blood left behind from their tearing stitches as he goes silent and completely absorbed in the hunt. It's over now. The police will be back with a warrant. His pet is running amok. There's no way he would ever be able to hide the signs of the attack nor the surgery. This is endgame stuff. This is it for him. It's over. Mr. Frontpiece, however, does not know that. As far as he's concerned, the police left and will never return, closing off his only perceived escape from this nightmare. Although he is able to smash one of the windows, the same window, I believe, that Lindsay smashed during her own escape attempt, Mr. Frontpiece sees that trying to crawl over broken glass would render them fucked before they made it 20 feet. The doctor corners them, growling, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and the centipede turns to face him. Thus begins Mr. Frontpiece's impactful speech. For the audience, I mean. He utters it entirely in Japanese, so neither the American women nor Dr. Hayter understand it, but it's a culmination of his character and it's important for us at least. He asks Dr. Hayter if he is God, then he compares himself to an insect. I cast out my parents and left my child for a selfish life, he explains. I am below insects, but dear God, if this is my punishment, I am still a human being. At which point he kills himself by slitting his throat wide open with a shard of glass. The wider context of this scene being that help is like a minute down the road renders this scene a particular kind of tragedy. But be real, this fellow thinks help has abandoned him, and he thinks the doctor is about to put him to sleep and do even worse things to him. So he does the only thing he has left within his own power to do. He kills himself. Out of spite. He kills himself to destroy the perfect pet Hayter had created. He killed himself to assert his humanity and autonomy. He kills himself because death is the one place that Hayter cannot find him. As Jenny will soon die, Mr. Frontpiece probably knows that should he die too, Hayter will be left with one single person, and his dream will be ruined. The police are back a moment later, and they seem to have left their brains in the car. They split up and search for clues. The officer that drank the water is now staggering around, throwing up white foam, unable to see properly. Rehypnol apparently inhibits decision-making and coordination, so we'll let him off on this one. That said, I do wish he'd called for backup. Dr. Hayter hides in the pool room in a grim parallel to how he hunted Lindsay in here, only now he's hunted. Somehow, off-screen, he gets the gun off the disoriented officer and shoots him dead. The other officer sees the door the centipede is hiding behind, but searches the rest of the house first anyway, finding the operation room and whatever else long before actually checking out the suspiciously battered door and finding, to his horror, the centipede behind it. Going to check on his comrade, he is shot 3 times in the chest and dies, not before nailing Dr. Hayter in the center of his forehead, killing him dead on the spot. The film returns to Lindsay, now trapped between 2 dead bodies left to starve to death, or so it's assumed by the film and some of the reviews I saw. I imagine the officer's absence will be noted within a few hours. Someone will call to ask how things went with the search, be it that day or the next, and someone will be out there to check on things sooner rather than later. I don't imagine Lindsay will starve to death. She'll likely be saved before she dies of starvation, and in the grand scheme of things will be okay, unless obviously the corpse in front of her doesn't purge into her mouth for an hour. As you can see, I've given this movie the best possible representation across this video. Themes highlighted and analysed, best case scenarios assumed, open details explored. I really sat down today and tried to treat this movie with the same kind of reverence I would treat a movie I thought was good. And therein lies the kicker, because in hindsight, I don't think this movie is very good. All in all, the story of the Human Centipede is textbook, considering what it tries to tackle. The Human Centipede was divined one day as the result of a thought experiment focusing on methods of extreme punishments befitting extreme crimes, and consequently plays out as far as that would go. What would happen if someone was kidnapped and sewn into a Siamese triplet? Well, they'd be very unhappy, and then the police would probably get involved at some point in the process, and then everyone would die, or everyone would live, or some people would die. It's hard to find the concept of the Human Centipede compelling because so much of the story is focused on the will he won't he cat and mouse pursuit of Hayter and his middle piece final girl. The tension of will he manage to capture her and place her in his surgical abomination is somewhat abated by the title of the film and its entire premise, and its trailer, and all the promotional material. I think a story focused on life after the operation would have been more effective, because the only possible factor left in the air by the end of the movie is, do they escape? And if so, who dies? As it stands, the story is perfectly serviceable because it literally begs the question, what would happen if someone did this? And it answers it. Just, I think it could have been more, and it really wasn't. Adding to that, the many plot contrivances in this story contribute to a feeling of a half-baked narrative. Plot contrivances aren't plot holes, to be clear, and they also have nothing to do with suspension of disbelief, which is its own thing, and sometimes people get confused. Suspension of disbelief is when you are presented with rules for a piece of media that you accept in order to engage with that media. For example, Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill 2 involves you going to an isolated, ghostly, horrible town full of monsters made from your innermost psyche that you must battle through to earn self-acceptance and face your sins. That's the rule of the media. You accept it. However, when Eddie shows up with a fresh, hot, steaming takeaway pizza delivery, that's where suspension of disbelief struggles. Like, where the fuck did he get that? That's not part of the rules. It's why I hate when people say, you can believe that so-and-so happens, but you can't accept this one completely unrelated inconsistency. Like, yeah, no, duh. I suspend my disbelief for magic, or zombies, or ghosts, or dragons, or whatnot. That doesn't mean I immediately accept inconsistent currency systems, or nonsensical character choices, or characters crossing hundreds of miles between scenes without a word. Plot holes are contradictions or impossibilities that would make the narrative impossible or cast real doubt on the logic of the situation. For example, in Toy Story, if Buzz doesn't think he's a toy, why does he play dead near children? Cinderella's slipper is the only part of her ensemble that doesn't disappear at midnight. And why does the big bad wolf need to pretend to be grandma to eat Little Red Riding Hood? Plot contrivances are pieces of the plot massaged into place to render things possible but cheap, and there are a lot of them in the Human Centipede. Off the top of my head, the Bunker nightclub being a long drive through a dark forest away. Lindsay is tied to the bed for 2 days before she realises she can slip out quite easily. Lindsay doesn't go for help, instead fetching and dragging her unconscious friend out of the house, at which point she is tranquilized by the doctor and taken back in. Mr. Frontpiece doesn't kill Dr. Hayter when he has the chance, or meaningfully disable him, so he's back up and pursuing them within a minute of them putting him down. The police officer accepts and drinks water given to him by a man he knows is connected with 3 disappearances in the last, week or so. The police officers do not fetch backup even when they experience the effects of Rohypnol, or when they walk into the room and see the Human Centipede itself. The thing about these is that none of them are impossible. They all stand a chance of happening within the story, and I could suspend my disbelief for 1 or 2 of them. But I would argue you have a very limited amount of plot contrivances to use per movie before your audience becomes frustrated. Let's say audience patience is on a sliding scale and it starts at 100. After suspending your disbelief for the movie's rules, if that's done well, it will still be at 100. I'd argue every time you contrive a plot point, audience patience drops by between 10 and 30%. The bunker nightclub being a long drive would be for me like 10%. It's possible, and maybe it was a hostile situation. Lindsay being tied to the bed for days before magically removing herself from her restraints, for me, was like a 30% drop. That was ridiculous. So we're already down to 60% and the sewing hasn't even started. Trying to drag her friend out of the house rather than leave her behind is slightly more believable, so we'll go with 15% for that. You know, she's scared and panicking. I can imagine a situation where that happens. Mr. Frontpiece may also be in shock. Maybe he personally can't bring himself to kill, maybe he's exhausted and disoriented from days of eating nothing but dog food and being beaten and whipped. We'll go with 20% for that. And now we're at 25% remaining audience patience. Police officers accepting water for me was like another 20%. Police officers not calling for backup was more believable. One of them is drugged and the other one is in shock, but they should be trained. Either way, by the time we reached the end of the movie, my patience was at 0%. A few plot contrivances here and there are reasonable adjustments for keeping the narrative moving in a timely fashion. They're excusable if they're more believable or if the payoff is more worthwhile. Constantly padding your narrative with contrivances demonstrates to me that you didn't think it through that much when writing it. There are ways to write these contrivances out of the story fairly easily. Lindsay could have been handcuffed to the bed, only escaping when he unlocked the handcuff. The police could have received the news about the cars found nearby after drinking the drugged water. The girls could have been driving through the woods because they couldn't read the road signs. Contrivance after contrivance after contrivance made me feel disrespected as the viewer, and I felt irritated by the sheer insistence of this movie to keep going with all that under its belt. It felt like the first draft, zero feedback, straight from pen to camera. There's a good story in this, damn it. Just didn't find it. As I said before, the two female leads were not fantastic. Their acting was very stiff, especially during the scenes where they're arguing in the forest. You can tell they're totally aware of exactly where the camera is, and they're awkwardly acting straight into it, shouting forwards despite standing side by side. That said, I see why they were chosen for their ability to convey emotion through their faces. They're like totally different people in the Centipede, and I find that bizarre. When allowed to use the full range of motion, movement, and vocal talents in acting, they're not very good. When limited only to their eyes and guttural crying and grunting, they're really solid. Mad props for that. Akihiro was also brilliant. Despite only speaking Japanese across the entire film, he imbues his character with so much personality that you're rooting for him despite those limitations. He's the funniest part of the film, hands down, and I really enjoyed watching him. He managed to take being the front piece of a human centipede and actually make me believe it. That's talent. Still, Dieter Laser, who unfortunately passed away in 2020, is the shining star of this film. Akihiro is, in my opinion, the better actor, but I do not think this film would have been half as good without Laser. As he said in interviews, he felt compelled by this movie, and personally I got the impression that it's because it allowed him to work through his feelings of being the son of a Nazi soldier. Born in 1942, Dieter's father was a Wehrmacht officer stationed in France. Dieter mentions this a few times. Most of Dr. Heater's Nazi-like attributes were contributed by Dieter, including some of his personal effects, and it created a character so profoundly memorable that it made this movie what it was. In fact, Tom Six would claim after the fact that the Human Centipede was a reflection on fascism, but honestly I only got the impression that he made this claim after Dieter worked his magic. While this movie wasn't the best, it seemed profoundly important for Dieter from what I saw, and it was this passion that took it from a sex offender thought experiment into a genuine reflection on the grotesque experiments of Nazi scientists and their perceived human hierarchy. In fact, I think Dieter's passion for this movie really bore holes in that initial thought experiment. The Human Centipede demonstrated to me more Six's gleeful interest in ostensibly torture, given, quote-unquote, the right human specimen, sex offenders, pedophiles, people the general public have no sympathy for. That said, those lined up at the doors of Auschwitz were people the general public had been trained to have no sympathy for, selected by Mengele specifically because they were that opportunity for torture. There's a certain irony to that I wouldn't have noticed without Dieter's perspective and performance. Everyone else was fine. No notes. Ultimately, The Human Centipede is what you make of it. Is it a good movie? Not really. Is it well written and interesting? No, and sometimes. Is the acting good? In places. Is it a fun movie? Well, that's entirely up to you. Reflecting on this movie over 15 years after its release, I'd say it's referenced enough in popular culture even today that it is worth giving it a watch just to see whether it's your kind of thing. It's an interesting and unique concept bundled in a movie you probably won't love, but hey, why not? Thanks for watching.